Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first Q&A celebration for the 10th anniversary of New Masters Academy. With us is Miss Tina Orsolic Delacio. We will introduce her and start with questions. But first, we want to also encourage everyone to sign the anniversary guest book. If you sign, it will be featured in our commemorative art pieces. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you? Happy anniversary.
Thank you. We're doing good. All right. So, without further ado, so Miss Tina Orsolic Delacia is a figurative painter born in Zagreb, Croatia. She received her formal academic training at the prestigious Florence Academy of Art in Italy, during which she was granted a meritorious scholarship. She graduated from Florence Academy of Art in 2018. Tina also holds a bachelor's degree from University of Zagreb Law School, an LLM degree from the University of Michigan Law School, and a PhD degree from the University of, I'm sorry if I'm butchering this, Maastricht faculty, and she was a faculty of law before becoming a painter. She taught philosophy of law at the University of Zagreb. So she is also an instructor at NMA, having recorded Introduction to Still Life Painting #1. So thank you for being with us today and for taking
Thank you
time.
for inviting me to join you.
It's our pleasure to have you here. So we have a whole host of questions from the anime community. So let's go ahead and get started. So your bio indicates that you were teaching as a professor. What initially got you interested in art?
Well, that's a hard question. I think, the initial interest probably came somewhere from way back in the day when I was a child, and probably from my upbringing. My parents were they were art lovers. My mom was a photographer too, and an amateur artist, painter. I was very lucky to grow up in a house full of beautiful artwork. So that's just that visual aspect of it, and the appreciation of the aesthetic that art can bring into your home was something that was instilled in me very early on. And then I was one of those kids who, just sort of spend hours drawing and creating toys out of nothing. I guess there was always this creative part of me. And then later on, it spilled into my adult years. And it was definitely reignited the love for art and better understanding of art too when I met my husband, Mark D'Alessio, and then started spending time with him and observing him create art and being a part of the process too as a model, and just learning how it works, how the life of an artist works. So yeah, it's a complex question to answer, but I think it goes way back into my childhood and then gradually sort of spills into the more recent years.
I think it's safe to say keeping the spark alive, and every kid has that creative
Yeah.
process in them, and it's just keeping that alive and keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're lucky enough to be when we're surrounded with people who supported that in us. And like I said, my parents were already art lovers and appreciated every little project of mine and encouraged me through it. And then later on, to have a husband who gave me his full support when I decided to change careers, that was just invaluable. And yeah, so it's definitely contextual. It depends on the people who surround you, the circumstances you grew up in. All the exhibitions you've seen, art galleries, all that instills that sort of deep love and appreciation of art.
Absolutely. And do you think there was a moment, like a specific moment, that made you go, like, this is it, this is what I could and want to do for the rest of my life, or is just a whole host of all those experiences that you've mentioned so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely there was a number of factors, a number of moments, a number of situations which crystallized the idea and the decision, a number of people who supported me along the way and without whom I don't think I would have dared to imagine the prospects of launching into this new thing, because it's, I mean, I imagine out of the listeners who we have here, there might be 1 to 10 more who are contemplating something like this, and it's freaking scary. I mean, you're sort of well installed into your professional life, everything's working well, and then all of a sudden you're deciding to abandon it all and start from scratch and thinking, God knows where this is going to lead me. It might be a terrible mistake. But yeah, without the support of principally my husband, but then my family, my friends, and really everybody who I was dealing with along the way, including my colleagues, weirdly enough, from work. Once they saw what I was up to, because I kind of kept it a secret for a long time, they showed me full support, and that was just incredible, and I will cherish that for the rest of my life. So yeah, it's a lot of things, it's a lot of people, it's a lot of moments, it's a lot of inner discoveries, the feeling of growth you're experiencing through every little artistic process you're a part of, and all of that kind of piles up. And then a moment comes when you sit down with, in this case, it was my husband, and say, like, I really want to do this. You know, how can I make? Is it possible to make it happen? And then luckily, he's the one who had all the experience and intel, so to say, so he could steer the process in the right direction. And back in the day, I don't think there were things like New Masters Academy where you could, you know, take these sorts of online classes or listen to this insane, incredible knowledge being shared by a whole community of artists with a whole community of prospect artists. So none of that existed. So it was kind of, it's pretty recent that I switched careers or quit my previous job. So yeah, all of that played a part, and I don't think it's fair to expect of oneself to reach a point when you will say this is it. Because I don't think with any big decision in life is there such thing as, you know, pure clarity and conviction and persuasion that that's the right thing to do. It all sorts of builds up slowly, and then you launch into it, and then you're still not sure if it's the right thing, and then in the process the river just kind of carries you in hopefully the right direction. In my case, knock on wood, it's proved to be the right one.
Yeah, absolutely. The just, you see yourself doing this over and over again until you kind of, you just gotta jump over the over the edge and see where it leads, right? Okay. So I have another question. What would you say is the most important lesson you learned when you switch to art as your main thing?
The single most important lesson, now that's a hard question. I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned very early on, and I'm very grateful for whoever opened my eyes to that fact, and I'm not even sure where it came from, is the fact that being an artist is a lifelong learning process. It's not something you master, you know, painting, say, or drawing. At the academy, you get out and you're a fully established professional painter. It doesn't work like that. It's a self-explorative process. It's a process of learning about different techniques, about different affinities you have, about different interests you want to pursue in your career as an artist, and just the humility to accept that and to kind of understand, okay, this is gonna be for as long as I live. Essentially, I'm gonna be a student. I think was probably the most valuable and important lesson that I still keep living with every day, and definitely agreeing with every day. And it's kind of nice because it keeps you young at heart. Just accepting, you know, you're not a doctor of painting. You're an artist. You're always going to keep growing. And I mean, everybody always keeps growing. I think in every profession you always continue to learn until the day you quit your job or until the day you die, which is the case for most artists. But I think with art, it's particularly so. It's, you know, that humility that just penetrates every aspect of your career, of your artistic existence and process is incredible. And yeah, there's something to learn from that too.
I'm definitely a fan of the continuous learning process, like never stopping, continuing to just learn something new every day, and whether it's art or anything else that's presented to me. So I definitely keeping an open heart and keeping an open mind as well is incredibly important. Um, so do you have any particular artists, past or present, that have influenced you in your work the most, that you find constantly looking to for
Yeah,
inspiration?
yeah. I mean, our house is filled with art books. On every occasion possible, we are going to be visiting a museum. You know, we don't, Mark and I don't do tourist, Mark is my husband. We don't do tourist things, but whenever we're in a city that offers any sort of decent exhibition or art gallery, we're gonna spend time visiting it. As far as, so all of that definitely influences your practice as an artist. You're looking at how other people are handling it. It's just hugely inspiring. It, you know, occasionally brings you to tears to see a great art show, and all of that somehow plays a role in the way we approach our own art making. But as far as sort of the biggest influences are concerned, I think I would to name a few, but I would have to separate them based on the subject matter. That
Mhm.
because I paint still lives, I paint, as you all know, I paint landscapes too, and I paint portraits, and I would be looking at different artists for different subject matter. So for still lives, as you probably gathered from my course, the people I most look at are, it's all 19th century painters, really. I mean, that's the kind of 19, early 20th century. So that's the period that really I love the most. And then the artists of today that kind of look at that period and create artwork in that style, not necessarily copying it, but just sort of following the language is also what I'm looking at a lot. But yeah, for the 19th century guys, they, as far as still life goes, I guess Fantin Latour, Merritt Chase, and William Nicholson are probably my favorites. But then, you know, there are a ton of others. Vuillard, I love what he was doing. And I love what he was doing in the later period, which kind of stepped away totally from the 19th century aesthetic. So I do look at the evolution too. Then from the, as far as portraiture goes, I guess Repin and Serov, two Russian artists, and John Singer Sargent, and Zorn, and Soroya. Now, Soroya would then play a role in the next genre as well, massively, which is landscape painting. And I dare say he's probably my favorite artist of all times. If I ever sort of was in floods of tears during an exhibition, it would be Soroya. And he is just, it was surreal how good that guy was. And then Levitan, for sure. I look at his work a lot. Just it seems so simple, but the stuff he was doing is just so incredibly subtle and complex, with glazes and all sorts of scumbling, beautiful techniques he was using with his landscapes. But then the whole just looks beautifully simplified and not overly, and nothing is overstated. And then I look a lot at 19th century Italian painters too, Macchiaioli, then Ettore Tito, Luigi Nona, Edward Seago, an English painter. So a whole range of them. Like I say, the house is filled with art books. So if I ever sort of lack idea or inspiration, that it just suffices to take one of these and flip through it, and all of a sudden you get the rush, the the urge back to create and follow in those footsteps.
No, that's fantastic. Sargent is one of my favorite too, so I can definitely see that in a lot. I can see the inspiration in a lot of your work, and um, so let me ask another question. So besides visual arts, are there any other creative outlets that you enjoy exploring, or?
Well, it's funny you ask. I recently launched. We recently moved a year and a
Mhm.
half ago to our new home in France. So home decor has sort of become my uh, hobby. It's just kind of a fun thing to do. And besides visual art, one thing that I have a load of vases, mainly for still life objects, something I've been collecting over the years and obviously brought with me. And I've been trying to fill them with flowers for a long time. It is just proven practically impossible to have every corner of your house filled with fresh flowers. It's a ton of work, and a ton of maintenance, cutting, changing water, making sure they're all happy. So I kind of got sick of that, and I still have a load of cut flowers, but I decided maybe I'll try sculpting flowers and filling some of those corners with maybe not equally beautiful, but somewhat charming sculptures of flowers. So I launched into that a few months ago, and one thing led to another, and now that people are actually asking me to exhibit those flowers, but it's a liaison between the still life painting and the home decor, and now sculpting. I did take sculpture at Florence Academy of Art for one semester, so I kind of had the basic knowledge of how to handle clay. And it's been fun. I managed to fill all the vases I needed, and now I have to produce more because, as it turns out, these are going to be shown at some point. So it's from hobby, it's turning into something a bit more than that. But yeah, that was my fun creative outlet lately.
Do you end up painting the flower sculptures as well, or is it just
That's a
in
good
clay?
question. I had a big dilemma whether to do it or not. And the impulse was to leave them as they are because I love that sort of raw look of clay
Mm.
and
Yeah.
more sculptural, monochromatic thing that it does. But then everybody was like, well, why don't you try? Why don't you try? So I did try.
Mhm.
In my defense, and I didn't like the result because I don't know, for some reason it became more decorative looking and less sculptural looking.
Okay.
And I loved the simplicity of them. Like I say, I actually do them in air dry clay because I don't have a kiln. And as it turns out, the way I'm going about making them, it wouldn't even work with the kiln because I'm
Mhm.
sculpting them around pre-existing stems. And to such finesse, thinness of petals that I was told by ceramicists that I probably wouldn't be able to fire them anyways. So I'm kind of sticking to air dry clay for now and doing them in 3 different colors: white, terracotta, and kind of gray stone color. And I like them the way they are, so I think I might keep them
All right.
keep them
Yeah,
like
no, that
that.
sounds that's an interesting dilemma. I was actually talking to another art history professor about the decorative versus like
Yeah,
artistic purpose of what we produce, and she said even like ancient cultures used to not even consider them artistic pieces. They were just like
yeah,
functional decorative components of whatever they were carrying. So yeah, I find that interesting that you're kind of clashing or interacting with that in a dynamic as well. So,
yeah. I
and my
mean,
wife is the sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, no, no. Tell me, your wife is?
No, but my wife is the interior designer in the house, so she has the house decorated the way like very very nicely, and I get her the books for that, and she's very passionate about that. So that's a fun hobby to have.
Yeah,
So
it's great, especially when you're just, nesting in your new territory. it's
yeah,
it's
and
sort of
and move,
essential to making home home, and
yeah.
especially for us as artists, I think that really plays a role. And because people come visit us here, they look at our art here, so I think every bit of it counts, and every bit plays a role
Mhm.
for art lovers. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love the landscape and the back of and behind you, and she's managed to make it very homey and lovely in our home. So that's relaxing and helpful for me when I come home after a long day.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
so it's very useful. Um, so talking about homey places and your studio, let's talk about your studio for a moment. Like, what is your workflow and schedule at the studio like? Do you happen to listen to music when you paint, audiobooks? How do you have your studio set up? And um,
So I work, I would say half of the time out of my studio, half of the time outdoors. So outdoors
mhm,
is my studio for a long chunk of my year. Uh, and it really all depends. I don't really work on a kind of tight schedule. It
mhm,
depends on the time of the year, natural light. In the winter, usually I have very short days. We're quite far west where we live in Europe, so we're part of the sort of Central European time zone, but we
mhm,
get the sunrise a bit later than those guys farther east get. So all
mhm.
that plays into effect. I'm also not a morning person. I have to admit to that. So like not a morning person at all. So that's been it's not an issue. It's just something my artistic practice had to learn how to live with and develop around. So I usually start my day, let's say around 9 o'clock. If I'm working in my studio and setting things up, that may take hours. Like actually setting up a still life
Mhm.
is not necessarily something I'll have done in 5 minutes. So depending on how long it takes me, I might start painting, after lunch in the afternoon only, and then take, if I'm not doing it alla prima and just in one session, then I'll resume the next day again earlier that time because I won't have the prep work to do. As far as landscape painting goes, I mean, that really just depends on the season. Again, the length of the day, what time of the day I want to tackle. Is it morning, midday, or late afternoon light effects? Depending on the landscape I'm painting, I might want backlit, want to have it frontlit. So it really varies tremendously day to day. I do listen to music. I don't listen to audiobooks
Okay.
because I can't focus on both at the same time. I mean, it's just not even a question of trying to focus. I just tune out. Like the audiobook becomes background noise, and 10 minutes in, I realized I didn't hear anything they were saying. So podcasts and audiobooks don't work for me. But a lot of music, a lot of classical music. Just to sort of have the relaxing background noise and something I can occasionally dance to and kind of fill my work process with those vibes too. I'm always trying to pick the music that is not too disturbing for whatever it is I'm doing.
That's good. Do you have any specific tracks or artists, musicians that you gravitate to? I'm a fan
So
of rock music, so I'll be rocking out in
yeah, it's
between.
not gonna be rock. I can tell you that it's gonna be from ranging from Schubert's piano sonatas to Andrew Bird if I'm in the mood for something more bouncy, or Oscar Peterson, a lot of jazz. So it really kind of depends on the mood. But
Okay.
yeah, bluegrass, jazz, indie, kind of from the more contemporary stuff, and then a lot of classical too for
Mhm.
older
Awesome.
generation.
Yeah. No, I'm currently on like a Chainsaw Man soundtrack kick, so that's what I put on when I
Right.
want to concentrate. So that's just my thing. But I like
Great.
I like
To each
I
their
gotta
own.
get into jazz. Yeah. Go ahead.
I
Sorry.
have I know painters who listen to the same thing on repeat the whole time because they
Yeah.
find it soothing to sort of not have anything new come into their head as
Yeah.
they're painting. So it just depends. And then there are others who, my husband to begin with, he goes through, history podcasts, which will tell him about 1,000 years of one country's history, and then he'll actually memorize it all and know it after. he's done painting and listening to, which in my case, there's no way I would completely
That,
tune out and not even
to, to
register.
to my wife's detriment, that's me on the car on road trips. I would just listen to like a history podcast for like the entire thing. Okay, that's great.
Yeah, we do that too. Yeah.
All right. So you wrote in your blog after finishing your time at the Florence Academy of Art as a student that the learning process starts in a more solitary fashion. And I was wondering, what is that like for you? Like, what is that process? Like, how what does that mean for you?
So what I meant when I said that is that after you're finished with your program at the academy, you get no more assignments, first of all,
Hmm.
which is incredibly important because you're essentially starting to construct your own projects from scratch, meaning
Hmm.
subject matter choice, composition, light, uh, materials, everything, technique. I mean, literally, in that sense, you're on your own. So it's at the same time liberating, and for some people, it can be terrifying. I couldn't wait, but because I had a strong preference for one thing, for painting flowers. I don't know why that attracts me so much. They're just beautiful. You know? They're fun to paint. But that's something we couldn't really paint at the academy because they are so um, they fade so quickly. So you know you
Hmm.
couldn't commit. Usually these were 2 week or 5 week projects. You couldn't come with a bouquet of flowers and say this is what I'm going to be doing because your teachers are going to say, sorry, this is going to be dead in 3 days. So you have to choose something more permanent. So, but then for other people, they loved having the sort of guidance and the supervision that you would get at the academy. You don't get the critiques, obviously. That's something that's incredibly valuable. So all of a sudden, out of the school, you're left without those. So it's always useful whenever you get the chance to talk to another artist or really anyone with a fresh eye to just look at your work and tell you what they think. Because sometimes, no, I wouldn't say sometimes, most often the problems come from uh, compositional errors. And that's something we can quickly disregard as we set up the project because it's something we kind of get used to looking at. And all of a sudden we don't see the problem anymore. But with a fresh eye, whoever might be able to help you with your projects, even out of the academy, it's really valuable to have that sort of feedback. But so yeah, in that sense, you're left with no supervision, no assignments. You're assigning your own project to yourself. You're figuring out your own direction for the future too, what it is that you want to paint.
Hmm.
And in that sense, it's a bit solitary, but it's also depending on how you like to work. Because some people are team workers. I don't think amongst us artists there are a lot of team workers. Otherwise, they wouldn't be choosing this as a profession. But some people do love to work in a team, and some people love to paint in a team. So I know
Hmm.
a lot of painters out there who love to landscape painters who love to move around as groups, and they all kind of stand next to each other and paint. Not the same necessarily view, but sort of pick the views in a fairly small perimeter, and then they chit chat the whole time. For me, that's the idea of a nightmare because I already told you I can't focus on conversation. I don't even know how I did the still life introduction to still life course, like just the fact that I was talking the whole time and painting. No idea how that happened. It was some sort of divine intervention. Otherwise, normally I don't do that. I don't talk to people when I paint. But yeah, so it all depends on your preferences. It definitely, art making definitely though, by and large is a very solitary thing. So out of the academy, you are no longer working in the studio surrounded with 20 other students. Professors are not regularly coming to critique you. In that sense, yeah, you're on your own. It's a beautiful thing.
It is. I mean, I think so. It's that freedom that truly lets you decide, like, what do I want to express? Like once you've gone through all the homeworks and gone through all the assignments and so
Alone,
on.
yeah. And what do you want to do with all those lessons at the end of the day?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the still life aspect of your work. You've spoken about the relevance of specific items in historic paintings. And for those of us that have not studied still life, could you talk a little bit about the meaning? Could you talk about more about the meanings and relevance of certain objects in still lives?
I mean, that's a big question, and I think it has a cultural context,
Hmm.
obviously. So, wherever you're based as a painter, it's going to depend on the circumstances you come from and you operate within.
Hmm.
Uh, I talked in the course about the sort of Western European, American, Western world tradition of painting still lifes, and could only really speak from that perspective because it's the only thing I learned. But so, like the stuff I mentioned in the course, they're more explicit symbols you can infuse your painting with, like putting a skull or a decaying flower in your still life. These are the sort of standard symbols of transience of beauty and life and mortality, and they are called vanitas paintings. And there's a whole range of subjects that one can insert into their still lives that sort of go into that direction. Then you can look at the symbolism, for instance, I'm looking at flowers right in front of me, of flowers, and
Hmm.
it is kind of tricky because when you start looking it up, you realize some flowers symbolize different things in different countries, and then it becomes a mess. What is it you're actually trying to say? But let's say, for instance, when I was painting one of my very early still lifes, just as I decided to launch into this new journey, artistic journey, I painted a bunch of daffodils because they symbolize new beginnings.
Hmm.
So, you can look at the symbols of certain flowers and uh, infuse your still life through the flowers or through the objects. Let's say if you want to celebrate a certain culture, um,
Hmm.
you can put objects from that culture in your still life, or a certain religion. I mean, there's multitude of things that and directions you can go into. And then there's the implicit messages, something that's
Hmm.
not going to be obvious to the eye of the viewer, but you are, whether on purpose or unintentionally, you're going to hide some messages which you can then explain in plain words. If you're, describing your piece of art as you exhibit it, you can always have um, a little sticker on the side
Hmm.
explaining
Yeah.
what it is you meant by it. So yeah, there are implicit, explicit meanings to different objects, and I think it's part of the composition of the painting, the sort of intellectual or mental composition behind the painting
Hmm.
entails also deciding what is it that you want to say and through which objects. And I think the liberty for every artist there is huge. And then sometimes paintings don't need to have any meaning. It can just be the representation of the beauty that you
Yeah.
faced at a given moment and got inspired to paint it. And then others can assign meanings to it too. So it's nicely flexible in that way.
So, and do you find gravitating to certain flowers or certain objects in your still lives that represent a
Yeah,
given theme, or?
I definitely do, but it has nothing to do with symbols. It's
Okay.
very mundane, my choice.
Okay.
It has to do with the way the form of a flower turns and the way the light hits the form. And
Hmm.
I find, personally, find the flowers that have a more kind of rounded shape more interesting to paint because they actually act as spheres. So they're not too divided. In their form is not too divided by petals opening in different directions. So just to give you an example, we're trying to get our cutting garden to
Hmm.
come to life. It's been a long-term and unsuccessful process so far, but baby steps. But for
Yeah.
instance, we planted a whole bunch of those kind of English antique style roses.
Hmm.
Because unlike the ones you can buy at markets, which are usually the ones that come sort of bud that then opens in a very pointy way, I find. I would opt for those that have like Fontaine Latour sort of rose, the little flat on the top and then rounded on the bottom. And those guys just have the most charming shapes, and the way they catch light is really beautiful. So then for other flowers too, I always try to look at the flowers that catch light in a nice way and look for a variety of shapes and sizes, like we were discussing for compositional purposes. So, it's also nice to have, say, dahlias, which can be huge and they can be small as well, or peonies. Again, you can have the cute little buds and then the big one opening right next to it. Hydrangeas are really fun to paint, especially outdoors, because they catch light in a really dramatic way, especially the white ones. So yeah, all these kinds of, like I said, very technical preferences in terms of how the flower actually behaves in nature. But I've tried painting also flowers that don't look like that at all, like gladioli or lilies, but yeah, somehow my preference is towards the more unified forms that can then describe the light and the geometry of the flower more simply.
I've definitely started to get a newfound appreciation for flowers and still lifes more recently because of all the work that the artists and the instructors at the NMA are and I was blown away by your still lifes as well in your website. So that's fantastic. That's good to know and helps me now. Next time I go to Home Depot with my wife, makes me think twice about what I'm looking at. So all right, and all right. And so you also have in your catalog like landscapes and portraits as well as still life. So how do you decide what you tackle at the start of any given project? And do you find you gravitate to one more often than the other, and why?
It just like my painting schedule that we discussed earlier,
Hmm.
that all really depends on the time of the year we're in.
Hmm. Okay.
So I would definitely have a preference for painting landscapes this time of the year in the
Hmm.
summertime, both for the reasons of the beauty of the landscape, because it's colorful right now. It's going to be sunflower season here, so everything's going to be bursting with color. We had wheat season just before they harvested it, so everything was, we had hillsides covered in this golden, beautiful wheat, and some months before that it was kind of pale green. So those months I will try to devote myself to painting landscapes more, and those are the months also when typically we have art openings and galleries want us to go visit and paint the local landscapes, so we can show
Hmm.
them in those galleries. And people tend to have a preference for summer scenes, for sort of bright blue skies, sunny environment, not the rainy, grim days. I don't know why. I love
I don't know either.
I
Rain is
love
my favorite time,
I know.
right?
But somehow when it comes to the kind of paintings people buy, it turns out they're not big fans of gray skies.
I'm in
Anyway,
Houston, so the weather
yeah,
here is just hot, and more hot. So rain is just a
yeah, you
relief,
love rain. Yeah, exactly.
and
It's
it's
also
one of my
global
favorite.
warming. We want rain. It's a good thing.
Yeah,
But so
yeah.
yeah, this time of the year, and then another thing, there will be there will definitely be some still life painting this time of the year too. But another problem you have this time of the year is that it gets hot. We don't use
Mhm,
AC in Europe, or at least not in our house. And flowers tend to fade really quickly in hot
mhm,
environments once they're cut. Even when they're uncut, actually, sometimes they'll fade more quickly in the garden if I leave them out in the sun. But so in that sense, you're sort of planning your projects around what works best during that certain time of the year. And then winter time, I would say February, March, the colors are kind of not so interesting.
mhm,
We get autumn colors up until where we live up until, let's say, December. but then it kind of all switches, all the warms are gone, it all kind of looks gray, brown, boring. There's no foliage anymore on the trees. So rarely would I go out painting. And also it's miserable, cold, and rain a lot. So I don't have the right gear to stand in the rain and paint. So often that part of the year I'll devote to painting still lifes and or expanding smaller landscape paintings onto a larger format. And then there's portraits, which are basically, at this point, I kind of stopped painting models and hiring models. I just take portrait commissions. So whenever the clients are ready to come, I usually like to schedule them from spring to autumn. So they also have something to do in this region, because if they come in the winter, it's kind of miserable weather. There's nothing much for them to see. Whereas in the summer and spring and autumn, there is a lot of festivities. So they can pose for 3 hours a day and then do their thing and have fun. So it all kind of depends on the season, basically.
There's something a little wonderful about the just letting the seasons kind of take your fancy and letting you dictate your projects. Like, oh, it's summer, it's spring, I get to paint and go outside and then do all that in the autumn and fall months. No, that's fun. For me, it's like semesters. Like semesters basically dictate what my life is like.
Yeah, that was the case for me before when I was in the academia. Now it's the season.
Like, oh, it's January, you're getting ready for the semester. All right.
That's right.
All right. So from the places that you have traveled and painted in plein air, do you find yourself, you have a favorite one, a favorite location or favorite spot that you would pick from? Or
I think the place I was probably most mind blown and inspired was in Morocco, especially in the town called Fez. It's one of the largest historic medinas, medieval core of the city, that has over 1,000 small streets, and just every corner you would turn would be mind-blowingly beautiful. With the intense sun and the arches and the shadow and the ancient architecture and people in their robes looking absolutely gorgeous. I don't know why in Europe we wear pants all the time, and in America, men and women in those robes just look so beautiful and picturesque. And I'm sure they're more comfortable wearing that than we are, having all our separate garbs and trousers and stuff. So, anyways, it was insanely picturesque. But I don't know if I can call it my favorite place, because while it was incredibly inspiring, beautiful, it was also super intense to paint there, because it's extremely busy. These little streets are filled with people, often people who are trying to sell you stuff. Souks, the markets, are just bursting with life. You often get surrounded by 20 plus people who don't leave you much space, so you're sort of squeezed on a maybe 1 square meter surface and trying to fight your way through the crowd, trying to touch your equipment and talk to you and all that. Like I said, doesn't work for me. so just in terms of managing different tasks, but then again, you get used to it, and I'm perfectly comfortable. We also, Mark and I, always separate. We go our own ways when we paint, so you're sort of on your own, and it's a bit unpredictable too, being a woman in a country that is absolutely not used to women standing out in the street and painting landscape paintings. You're sort of, I wouldn't say asking for trouble, but you're definitely provoking reactions, which can then throw you off. But people were super friendly, incredibly welcoming. But then again, like I said, it's intense. You have to cope with a lot of stuff going on around you. And just in terms of setting up too, you never know if a merchant is going to show up and try to kick you out of that position, because it feels like every square centimeter is occupied in the Medina. So you're basically fighting for your little tiny piece of land during that 2 3 hour period. But yeah, it's just so crazy beautiful, and it feels like you speaking of 19th century, like somebody sort of took you out of the present day context and dropped you in that ancient world where everything is preserved in a beautiful way.
I want to say Sargent went to Morocco, I think, and I think those are some of my favorite watercolors. But
Yeah.
also, George Pratt's course on comics has like a bunch of pictures of Morocco, and I was just
All
blown
right.
away by how beautiful it is. So,
Yeah,
so yeah,
it's
no.
great. It's
I,
so beautiful.
but that comment about all the cultural reaction to just standing alone and drawing, that reminds me of this book I'm reading, where a female French painter in the 1800s, she would wear pants and she would call them her armor to go to the animal market to paint animals and do all the, and she had to get a permit to do that. So that's an interesting.
Yeah, yeah, we've gone a long way
We
since
come a
then.
long way, yes, definitely. No need for a permit nowadays, so that's good.
Yeah.
So we have about 15 minutes, so we have let me look at an additional question. You have a very prolific. Sorry, you have an Instagram account. So, how do you manage to find your audience in social media? Like, what were you? Did people just find you on their own, or how did that come about?
I mean,
Keeping
yeah,
it.
I should probably ask my audience to understand better how on earth did they find me. But I just do the standard thing. I mean, I'm apparently, according to social media experts, I suck at managing my account. I only no, because I kind of insist on just posting paintings, and only in the last week I started experimenting with reels, which I'm not a big fan of. But as it turns out, the algorithm just completely hides your
Yeah.
stuff if you're not doing them. So I started doing that a bit, and it definitely did make a huge difference in terms of the visibility of what I was posting. So I'm thinking I have a strategy. I don't know if I will screw everything up by doing that, but I'm thinking I might post the reels, then wait some time, and then just delete them all and just keep the clean look of the image by image by image, because my Instagram also kind of acts as a portfolio, so you can track the paintings, where they were painted, when they were painted, and but I don't know. I probably get social media experts tell me that that's a stupid move and that I will somehow screw up the account's visibility again.
I mean, they switch it on you all the time, so I totally get that. Like, I am not a fan of reels myself, but I found that if you do a photo with the audio, you get a good engagement just the same. So, I mean,
Auto
you don't
with,
have
oh
to do
yeah,
video.
that's right.
Yeah.
If you
So,
just put okay,
and
cool,
it
thank
lets
you
it,
for
let,
that
it lets me
advice.
kind of set the mood. Yeah. So
Yeah, yeah,
that's a fun
yeah.
one.
I'll
Okay.
try that. But yeah, otherwise, I mean, I just use sort of tags that are descriptive of the kind of art I do, and I
Hmm.
think that's probably how I get my audience. I don't know. I mean, I would
Yeah.
assume so. I don't really follow any tags besides a few historic painters, so and it's true that whenever I see something I like, I wouldn't follow that person. I just save it in my saved items, which is basically just saved paintings that inspire me.
Yeah.
Uh, so as you can tell, I'm not super tech savvy, and I'm just sort of doing the minimum, tagging things
Like,
and
yeah,
posting.
no. I have two accounts and both of them are neglected for my children's photos. So, like, that's. Hello?
I just lost you there, and it says streaming is now reconnected.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, cool.
No, I have two accounts and they're both, except for my cute children's photos, that's about as good as I am at
Yeah.
Instagram. I just talk to my family and my friends group chat, so I get it. But speaking of images that you save from, like, do you have like an artistic hero or heroine that you find like the most aspirational or inspirational? Like, from, I know you listed quite a bit for when you're looking for inspiration on your work. But do you do you have a one that you would pick most, or?
I mean, yeah, this is gonna sound super cheesy, but definitely my husband. I mean, he's first of all, he's the only
Oh,
one I know deeply enough to actually say he's a hero of mine without making any sort of false claims. Because sometimes you're like impressed by a person and their artistic skills, but they can turn out to be an asshole in their private life. Which, in Mark's case, he's a wonderful person and a wonderful painter. He's also super humble and generous with his knowledge, so that's exceptional. I mean, he's just really sharing everything freely out there, and is super hardworking. And I think, in terms of my own work ethic, he's by far the biggest influence, because I'm just sort of watching. I kind of grew up as an artist, watching
mhm.
him do this thing. And it's taught me that you have to approach art making pretty much like any other job. It's an everyday thing, and there is no such thing as waiting for inspiration. Inspiration is a muscle you train, and the more you train it, the stronger it gets. So at some point, you'll be able to just walk out of your house and see a bunch of scenes that are beautiful potential paintings. Whereas if you're sort of waiting for it to hit you for weeks, um, you're going to be missing out on a
Yeah.
bunch of wonderful stuff around you. So, in that sense, I think he really set me up in a positive way. Also, with lessons like he doesn't believe there's such thing as talent, which I think is
Hmm.
an incredibly useful thing for people like me who are switching careers and. Um, Thinking or understanding or accepting that art is actually something anybody can do with proper training is invaluable, and not waiting for some proof that you're an especially gifted one
Hmm.
is actually very beneficial in the pursuit of your passion as an artist. So yeah, he just shared and continues to share a whole bunch of really inspirational, really uh, useful things as to how to exist in this world as an artist without intending to do so. He's just being who he is. But yeah, if I have to name a hero, it would definitely my hero. It
Oh,
would definitely be him. And then he just gave me, this unconditional support in my own artistic journey, even though he kept saying that he much preferred saying that his wife is a law professor rather than an artist. He still supported me all along the way. And
that's
yeah, in that sense, I mean, that's just so precious.
that's beautiful. That's amazing.
Sorry if I'm being
Yeah.
too
No,
cheesy.
that no, no, that's definitely fantastic to hear, and yeah, and should we all be so lucky? I know my wife enjoys, and she enjoys the ones I do for the kids. Like I draw the did a little Calvin and Hobbes inspired thing for
Oh,
the
great.
and she has it hanging. So to me, that's like all the endorsement I need to
Yeah,
continue
there you
doing
go.
this.
And it's
So yeah,
incredible how much that sort of support
yeah,
can help you to
hmm,
make bigger decisions in life as an artist too.
yeah,
And
yeah.
eventually
She,
maybe switch careers. Just that
mhm,
sort of little push from your community and
yeah,
encouragement and occasional words of support, it's just so precious. And yeah,
yeah.
that's all you need.
No person is an island, right? So
Exactly.
we're all surrounded by the
For
ones that
sure.
love us and support us. So we gotta be grateful for that. Well, we're about our final question. So, with that muscle that you've been training on, are there any upcoming projects or exhibitions that you're particularly excited about, or you would
Yeah,
like
I'm
to?
actually right in the middle of, we are right in the middle, Mark and I, of preparing our exhibition in the Gers, which is the region we live in. And it's
Hmm.
going to be called A Year in the Gers. And we exhibit in a village that's sort of 20 kilometers away from us in the beautiful setting of a church. And it's
Hmm.
part of an art event where 18 other artists are going to be exhibiting their work. So what we set out to do is basically gather our landscape paintings and some still lifes from the our first year in the Gers, our
Mhm.
founding year as Gersoise painters, and show it to the local public, which to me is perhaps the most exciting thing you can do. Just, show your whatever it is you've been up to as an artist to the guys who sort of see you day to day working out there in the field and wondering when are we going to be able to see a larger volume of these works. Well, that's exactly what we're preparing now. So that's coming up early August, and we're actually going to be managing it on our own for the first time because that's simply how the event works. So we have to do a bunch of prep work, invitations,
Wow.
all the stuff that galleries normally do for us. We are now on our own, so there's a lot of work, but it's exciting.
That sounds super exciting, and I look forward to seeing as much as I can about that. So,
Thank you. I'll try
all
to
right.
do a reel.
Mhm.
So, doing a little video of the exhibition as we set it up in the church.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to seeing that. Yeah, for sure. All right.
Thank
Well, that concludes our Q&A session. I want to again say thank you so much for taking the time to be here today and
you.
answer our questions, and for the NMA community for taking the time to also watch the Q&A. Make sure to look for Master Monday, which is coming up next in our digital campus. And again, Tina, it was a pleasure talking to you the
It was a great
entire
pleasure
hour.
talking to you,
So,
Manny. Thank you so much
so
for
thank
hosting
you.
it. Thanks.
My pleasure, as always. Have a good afternoon. Have a good
Have
day.
a great rest of the day. And thanks to the community for all the amazing questions. They were great.
Yes, absolutely. They were fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.